Danny, glad you came back. I wanted to take up that discussion we were having.
I can't right now.
About Abraham and Isaac. You remember what you said? That Isaac actually died on Mount Moriah. I've been thinking maybe you were right about that. You remember what you said? That Isaac actually died on Mount Moriah. I've been thinking maybe you were right about that. Died, and then reborn in the world to come. You remember what you said? That Isaac actually died on Mount Moriah. I've been thinking maybe you were right about that. Died, and then reborn in the world to come. Danny, stop. Where do you think you're going? Don't you know? There's nothing up there.
Sommar sicumani, Jude singukunu, bloweth sad and bloweth mad and springs the wood Singuku, how I'm led after lomlos after kauleku, Ullet stertet bukke vertet fyre singuku, Singuku, Svelfu sinnes kuku, es swift du navarnu, Sommar sicumani, sommar sicumani.
Greetings and welcome back to Analogia Intus. I'm your host, Will Tucker, and I'm joined again today by Mr. Connor Cregan on the second part of our series, The Strange Acts of the Messiah, in which we're going to be focusing on the Polish bard Adam Mickiewicz and the subject of Polish Messianism. We're going to look at the literary, philosophical, and spiritual undertones of this movement and see them through the lens of Sabbatean Frankist Messianism as a current and a vector by which Jewish and Kabbalistic ideas flow into the Roman Catholic Church, and particularly the theology of Vatican II. To start off today, I want to look at a video that was posted recently, or two videos actually, by Candace Owens. Candace, as a high-profile media figure, I typically approach with a sense of deep suspicion and caution, although here I want to pose and frame this segment as constructive criticism, as she is a public confessing Catholic. But I think there are some dangers to the messaging in which she's presenting this concept that we need to be aware of and we need to be on guard against. So welcome back, Connor. How are you today?
Doing well, Will.
Without further ado, I want to cue this up and just have some sort of informal responses and get the ball rolling.
We knew the history of the ADL. If we could learn that on Wikipedia, no one would support the ADL because the ADL, factually speaking, was founded to protect a pedophile named Leo Frank. This is very relevant. And by the way, I had a wonderful discussion yesterday with this Jewish PhD professor named and a writer named David Bashvikin on Twitter, because he heard about my episode talking about Sabbateanism, and I guess he assumed that I was going to say, like, this is what Jews worship, and I was actually saying the exact opposite. So I messaged him privately on Twitter, and we had this wonderful back forth speaking about how Jewish people and Christians actually need to unite and to do the research and to root out these satanic people that have infiltrated both of our faiths, including the Muslim, the Islamic faith as well. There has been an infiltration. The implications there are quite severe. So like I said, I can show you how all of our faiths have been infiltrated. And I say this, the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, and of course, the Muslim faith has been infiltrated by people with the explicit aim, as Sabbatai Levi had, of taking over the world, that through sin, they would be redeemed, that they had to commit sins. It's the form of Gnosticism. The more that you sin, the more egregious your sin, we will inherit the earth. But what he did to protect himself.
So I'd like to stop there. First of all, to just point to this idea that Sabbatean Frankism is attempting to infiltrate all the three Abrahamic faiths to undermine all three. In a sense, that's true. But I want to get your take first of all, Connor.
Well, first, I didn't know that she was having intercourse with David. I think sometimes I've heard it pronounced Duvid. I'm not sure which one it is actually, but that's interesting. I did not know that. He has like a whole, from what I understand, he has like a whole history of dialoguing with like alt-right figures and things like that. So that's interesting. I was not aware of that. But yeah, I'd like to just kind of connect this back to this digression I made last time about Ari Ben-Zvi's book, Savage Ingratitude, where I was kind of trying to describe Jewish leftism as a sort of limited hangout, or the idea, I should say, of Jewish leftism as a sort of limited hangout. And I get the sense that, I mean, this is even more revelatory, right? Where she's talking about Sabbatai Tzvi, she's talking about Jacob Frank and historical progeny and their sort of political and cultural and spiritual projects. But, you know, still sort of not connecting this to Judaism more broadly, not seeing that the seeds of this are in the Talmud. And, you know, also packaging this revelation with the idea that, you know, we have to have this sort of ecumenical Abrahamic opposition to these Frankists, right? Yeah, it's that is basically, I mean, we can commend her, I think, maybe for, you know, if I don't know how autonomously she's acting here. But, you know, I guess we could commend her for revealing these kinds of things, but it's this sort of packaging. It's this idea that there's infiltration of the faiths. When it's like what she's doing is the whole project, right? It is the whole Frankist kind of project. I mean, Frankist in a sort of broad general sense. It is this sort of converso project is to be indifferent about these religions, right? And to mesh them together. It's I don't know, it's kind of difficult to, I don't know, do you resonate with what I'm saying here? Or?
Absolutely, yes. So recently there was a historical fiction book written by a Polish author, Olga Tokarczuk, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, that won actually the Nobel Prize for Literature, that focused on Jacob Frank. It's called The Books of Jacob. And I want to read just a short excerpt from that, which kind of talks about, which I think you're getting at here. Jacob gives a lengthy talk to those assembled, full of parables. He proclaims a new religion, one accessible exclusively through Esau, meaning Christianity, just as Sabbatai crossed over to Ishmael, meaning the Turkish faith. The progress of salvation depends upon extracting from those religions the seeds of revelation and sowing them in one great revelation, the Torah of Absolute, Torah of the world of emanations. In this religion of the end of days, all three religions will be braided into one. So this illusion of braiding the three Abrahamic faiths into one universal religion seems oddly similar to what she's proposing here, that us, the three world religions need to band together and fight off these evil Satanists. So it's kind of this dialectical strategy that's being cultivated in her messaging here, whether or not, like you said, she's fully autonomous or not, to direct us to sort of link arms with, in ecumenical dialogue, Jews and Muslims, so that we can fend off this specter of Satanism. Never mind that the Church of Satan was itself founded by a Jewish man, Anton LaVey. And this idea of antinomianism, as you also said, is integral to the Talmudic tradition, much less the Kabbalistic tradition. So she's making a kind of false dichotomy and a false distinction here between Judaism and Frankism. Although Frankism can be seen as an aberration, as an extremist sect within the Jewish tradition, it's still continuous with the Jewish tradition and becomes reincorporated back into future movements such as the Hasidic movements like Chabad, Lubavitch, and others, which she is, I know, had some discourse with. I think she's spoken at a Chabad house before, and she's friends with Dennis Prager. But anyway, I want to keep going here, get some more. Unless you have anything you want to say to that.
No, not really. I mean, yeah, I guess I would reiterate that, like, it's difficult to determine, like, whether or not this is intentional or if this is just kind of something that's in the air. I see a lot of, like, Christians nowadays, like, speaking rather positively of like Andrew Tate or whatever, and just figures like that. So, and I think, there are reasons for that. The absence of, like, church leadership, of positive male role models. People are kind of, like, fixating on these kinds of figures. So, I mean, yeah, maybe this is just sort of something that's kind of in the air, because there is this sort of discourse with Muslims and Jews, more mainstream Jews. So yeah, I don't know. It's difficult to determine, but what could be said with certainty is that this packaging that she's putting this revelation in does with a kind of limited hangout. Like whether or not she's aware of that.
Right, and also it's blurring the source of the infiltration. This messianic project of going into the other world religions that's, within the Lurianic Kabbalah and obviously within the tradition of Abraham Avalofia, as we looked at the other day, and the possibility that Joachim de Fiore was some sort of crypto-Jewish messianic actor who was working prior to Frankism in the same sort of, according to the same strategy. She's blurring the fact that this is coming from one of the world religions is contributing this messianic concept. It's not Catholicism that's proposing to go into Islam and pose as it being a convert and then try to propose or seed into it beliefs of the Catholic faith surreptitiously. It's only coming from Judaism. But I'm going to continue here. There's more.
To protect his Frankist followers was he made a plea. He made a plea to the bishop at that time and said, hey, we'll convert to the Catholic faith. Our religions are not at war with one another. And not only that, but I will tell you, and he made this allegation that the Talmudists are killing Christians. Everything you suspected is true. They are killing Christians. It's a part of a blood ritual that they're doing. So you can imagine this was going on right now where you had the Jewish community warring with one another. And then what was the result of this was something which I so deeply regret for the Catholic faith, that bishop at that time allowed these false conversions, sided with Jacob Frank at that time because he's thinking, oh, well, if you're gonna throw this guy under the bus, you're gonna throw the Talmudists under the bus. And what then happened was this mass burning of a Talmud that took place in Poland, right? Fine. This is what this guy said. He's like, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. You can convert. And of course, they then later got kicked out of the Catholic faith. But by then, you see this apostasy continually happening where they just appear amongst other religions and they are explicitly saying to people, convert and hide yourself, convert, pretend that you worship these faiths, but privately you are going to worship the Zohar. You are going to worship the Kabbalah. You have to hide who you actually are. And in that book that I was telling you about, I believe that me having this conversation or having the courage to have this conversation, like I had that behind the scenes conversation on Twitter with David, will actually open up for the first time in a long time an alliance between Christian and Jews needing to root out these sinister satanic elements that are.
So braiding the rope, bringing the Abrahamic faiths together, ecumenical dialogue. Earlier on in the segment, she has a clip from that I edited out of Bishop Robert Barron responding to the Olympics blasphemy of the Last Supper, and how he's talking about how we have to make our voices heard in the public space. And she's in other clips, other videos shown. Andrew Tate sort of calling out Christians for being weak and passive and not defending their faith, and how their faith won't last unless they're willing to stand up to this evil satanic cabal. But it's what about it's Bishop Robert Barron who's calling for the re-Judaization of Catholicism. He's saying it over and over again on the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro. So anyway, thoughts, Connor?
Yeah, it's this like the whole premise. It gets away from the just how mutually exclusive these faiths are. I don't know, the way that she kind of speaks about them, and the way that she kind of frames the sort of Frankist, or we could just, as a general term, we could just say crypto kind of infiltration of different faiths. It's entirely granting their conception of the world, rather than it's granting a conception of the world as these, like, we have these world religions, these great world religions, that kind of paradigm, right? Rather than like these are actual claims about reality. They're not just these sort of I don't know, people use that word culture in a very sort of vague way, almost like in a manner that is synonymous with like nationhood, or sort of like regional material culture. But they're taking these more universal truth claims, and seeing this, projecting this sort of regional notion of culture onto them. And so like it doesn't really matter what they are saying about the world. It's like, do you get what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm coming across as too kind of vague here, but the way she's treating these various different communities as these sorts of world religions that need to kind of be respected in their own right, that need to be given their own kind of platform.
She's already, sorry to cut you off, but she's already,
no, that's really basic.
Yeah,
that's basically my thought, I should say.
She's already imbibed the liberal indifferentist categories of freedom of religion, which as a concept is already on board with the Frankist project in a certain sense.
Right,
she's assuming that error has rights, that these other world religions need to be protected in the same way that the one true faith needs to be protected, and that the source of our strength has to come through a kind of universal brotherhood that is already sort of harboring the seed of Frankism in that very notion. That makes sense.
Yeah, and you can't even really make way in the mainstream discourse without, in some way, like conceding these categories. The categories of this like indifferentist paradigm. In order to have any traction, you have to like be in some way. I don't want to say ecumenical. Because that's maybe a sort of overly naughty word. Obviously, we want to like search for the truth, and we want to share that truth with other people, and we want to look for the truth in a multifaceted and open kind of way. But really, this is not doing that. We are already taking to the table these categories, assuming outright that these so-called world religions have to be taken, taken seriously, or taken as like legitimate truth claims to contend with, right? And there's this sort of suspended limbo that we just sort of end up in, the sort of dialogical limbo where we're all respecting each other, we're all being, charitable to each other and that kind of thing. It just doesn't really go anywhere. And history shows that it doesn't go anywhere, especially the past 70 years shows that it doesn't go anywhere. And I just, I wonder, where do people think that it's going to go now,
Right. And sort of hovering over her entire analysis here is this false notion of what Judaism truly is. Because Judaism has this sort of chameleon quality, and, forgive the reptilian illusion there. But we as Christians almost have no capacity to understand through sort of Hellenistic categories how Judaism works as a tradition and how it operates internally, and its praxis for world revolution and for bringing about a messianic age at the end of history. So this the specter that she's sort of playing with and utilizing here is that Judaism is just this continuation of the Old Testament faith that just didn't accept Christ, and therefore just, as she'll say later, worships the Torah. She says worships the Kabbalah, worships the Torah, as though those are useful ways of describing it. But that said, as I'll get to, what is called the Torah within the Jewish tradition, and this goes for Reform, this goes for conservative, this goes through Orthodox and Hasidic movements and sects, is its accumulation of the Tanakh and the rabbinic text of the Talmud, the Mishnahs, and the Kabbalah as well. Now, not all sects openly endorse like the Frankist literature or the Sabbatean literature, but they do utilize some of its concepts, specifically like the Orthodox and the Hasidic movements do. So this idea that there is a Judaism out there that isn't Talmudic, that isn't Kabbalistic, is patently false, and it's a very dangerous deception to sort of to promote that illusion. And it seems like that's one of the things that Ben Shapiro was up to, by courting with Bishop Robert Barron and now Matt Fradd and Candace Owens. And it's unclear if Candace Owens is just sort of this dialectical foil to that discourse, but then who's still being used here to sort of prop up that illusion again of Judaism being just the Old Testament faith, and how we're not to jump forward too far here, but they're just our elder brethren, that we have this kind of mutual concern, and our interests are the same in terms of building a Judeo-Christian culture that will fight off the evil Satanists. But and I'm going to go on a little bit further here because there's more, Connor, that's I think is really going to jump out to you.
Happening right now on the world stage. I don't believe that this is our faith. I believe that there is a fringe cult that is operating, that they are satanic. And I wonder if we are dealing with people who can trace their history. I wonder if they can trace their lineage all the way back to the Canaanites. And they at first infiltrated the Jewish faith and the Muslim faith and then the Christian faith, maybe the Jewish and Christian faith around the same time based on what I've read. But these are very important discussions for us to be having if we are actually going to save things. We have to recognize that these people that worship Baphomet and this transgender deity, that the Kabbalah, this Lurianic Kabbalah recognizes this, and what they're trying to do through deception is to cast a spell on society to bring everybody into their consciousness. That is what it was explicitly their aims, by the way. I'm not making. So before I jump over to you, this idea that there is this, she's talking about, kind of the Illuminati bloodlines theory here, conspiracy theory, that the Jews who are the Frankists, who seem to have this interest in preserving their ancestry and genealogy and keeping it a secret and in changing their names, are actually the descendants of the ancient Canaanites who infiltrated the Old Testament Israelite faith and then steered it awry. And then they're actually the seed of the serpent
So this sort of typological language that's used in the Old Testament about the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and then our Lord seems to, he calls the rabbis, the Pharisees, you brood of vipers. They're taking this quite literally, that there is this sort of seed of iniquity, and this seems to fly in the face of, in my opinion, the whole concept of Christianity and what our Lord came to instill in the world, is the sense that it's not about blood election through bloodline, although there is a sense of a place for sort of within like a monarchical society, sort of ancestral rights and things like that. But in terms of salvation, there's neither Jew nor Gentile. So our Lord also says to Peter, St. Peter, the rock. He calls him the rock in which he'll build his church, but he also calls him, "Get behind me, Satan." Right? So does that mean he's saying he's of the seed of the serpent and of the the Canaanite religion, and he's a crypto, and then but now you're the rock and you're both, So I just don't think that's a misreading of typology, and I think it's a possibly a rabbit trail that's created by Jewish conspiracy thinkers like Ron Unz, Henry Mackall, who want to instill in Christians this sense that there's this this bloodline of satanic evil oligarchs who are managing the social order, and then there's actually that those aren't the true Jews, that there's another set of Jews. Now that I don't mean to paint so broadly to say that all Jews are sort of of the seed of iniquity. There's certainly hope that they can be grafted in too, but again, that flies in the face of this sort of hard-edged, rectilinear concept of okay, here's the seed of the serpent over here, here's the evil Frankist, here's the satanic cabal over here, and here's the good Talmudic Jews over here who just worship the Torah. Does that make sense at all to you, Connor?
Yeah, and I mean in the members only segment from the last installment, I discussed Mickiewicz. The title of his book, Mixed Multitude, is an allusion to, I believe it's Exodus 12, referring to these fellow travelers of the Israelites, and there's a traditional sort of rabbinical exegesis of that description as the sort of pathology that exists within Israel. And it just seems to me that she's kind of, knowingly or not, repeating this sort of exegesis, and that really this whole theme in conspiracy theory does kind of repeat this whole exegesis. I don't know. Do you think that that's kind of overgeneralizing, or I don't know? It's
no, not at all. And I think the idea of the holy serpent, the kosher serpent, the Leviathan that's a rabbinic typology that's existed since the Talmud. There's a story of the Leviathan that will come to lead the people of Israel out of Edom, out of Egypt, into the Messianic age, and then they'll slay this Leviathan, this Messianic Leviathan, and they'll eat its flesh, and then they'll take its skin, and they'll create a kind of sukkot tent out of it for the universal Sabbath, the final world Sabbath, which is the fulfillment of the Messianic age. So this idea that the seed of the serpent is this Canaanite infiltration into the true Hebrew religion that's preserved into rabbinic Judaism somehow, and then it just sort of goes awry here in the 17th or the 16th and 17th and 18th century with Sabbatean and Jacob Frank, in which they begin to rear their head again and create this sort of satanic world revolution. It's just a misrepresentation of history and misrepresentation of the Jewish tradition, and one that's very dangerous, especially given the current climate we have with the conflict in the Middle East and U.S. foreign policy, and the Catholic Church's seemingly ecumenical like it's subservience basically to the synagogue. That's what we've had since Vatican II. But there's a little bit more here. I'm gonna play, Connor. I think this is interesting stuff.
This up as I go along. This is the explicit aims. So I'm looking into the live chat right now, and I'm looking at some of your comments right here. And somebody said, "Oh, well, it's always the Jews." I actually want to respond to that. I'm going to tell you why you are correct, but you are also very wrong. Okay, now let's talk about the Jews. And I'm doing this, I'm doing asterisks. I'm not asterisks here, it's quotations, air quotations here, because you see this a lot, that people who have not done enough research, in my view, who think that this is a Jewish conspiracy. And this is kind of me, by the way, the same response when you get to people when I say, I was baptized Catholic and I'm so happy about it. Oh, what about the Catholic conspiracy? All of the faiths, Muslim, okay? If we're talking about Islam, we're talking about Judaism, we are talking about Christianity, have been infiltrated. All of them. There is not one of them that has not been infiltrated by a satanic cult that practices pedophilia, okay, listen to me, as a religious sacrament, and learned that psychoanalytic concepts actually derived from Kabbalah, okay? It is utterly absurd to suggest that the people who worship, who deem the Torah to be their holy book, are all worshiping the Kabbalah, the Zohar.
Is it absurd? I thought that was just basic, factual.
Did she really say that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. So she obviously, like I said, doesn't understand how the word Torah is manipulated and used to deceive Christians. And that's another aspect. It's just another case point in which Judaism is presented to the other world religions secretively, in which we really aren't supposed to know what the Jews actually believe. It's actually illegal in the Talmud for Gentiles to study the Torah, meaning the Talmud, and the secrets of the Tanakh. The Kabbalah is meant to open up the secret meanings of the Old Testament. So when they talk about Torah, the Talmud and the Kabbalah are supposed to be the perfection of the Tanakh, of the Old Testament, and you can't separate those different writings from one another. What were you going to say, Connor?
Yeah, I'm speechless. Like this distance that she's creating between Zoharists and Talmudists it's entirely fictional. I have really nothing to add. That's quite astounding.
Yeah, and I'm pretty confident that the Talmud itself enshrines pedophilia as being licit, at the very least. There's those passages which all of us conspiracy theorists know about and then get sort of explained away whenever they're brought to question from Jewish apologists. But this is a debate. These are internal dialogues that the rabbis are having to kind of tweeze out the intricacies of the law. But is it now, or is it a way of creating loopholes and being able to redefine the law in our own image so that we can sort of be our own sovereigns, so that we can decide the state of exception and we can sort of create our own vision of reality that's freed from the Old Testament God of sovereignty and natural law. So the fact that she's saying that it's not even, that there's this distinction between the Zoharists and the Talmudists and the Jews who worship the Torah and the Jews who worship the Zohar, whatever that means, is just deception or ignorance, I would say. Let's say ignorance, because we're trying to be charitable here and constructive. A little bit more.
Who, from this castle, had sexual rituals, incest with her father, who had people bringing her gifts, that the Brandeis family were committed Frankists. They believed in pedophilia. They believed in this as a sacrament, okay? They believed in blood rituals on holidays. They believed that you had to sacrifice people. All of this is in the books, okay? They believed people died in this castle. Blood ritual sacrifice. And this is not libelous, so you can spare me this is blood libel, because again, these people are no more Jews than they are Christians. There is an elite cabal And the way that they have done this has been absolutely stunning.
Sorry, I had a little bit of a glitch there, but I think you were able to hear that, right? That these people are no more Jews than they are Christians.
Yeah, this whole thing about Brandeis too. I mean, it's not exactly clear. She's developing this idea of Frankists as this continual thing, or continuing sort of under that name or that nomination, or she's sort of painting this picture as if, and I'm aware of like the fact that there's this there's this picture of Eva Frank in Louis Brandeis' desk and whatever, and I mean I get that what that actually means, or like I don't know. It's kind of difficult to extrapolate just based on those small evidences that could just be sentimental objects of one kind or another. The whole nature of crypto, right? Just as a general concept, is just continual lying, continual obscurity of your previous identity, and assimilating to some particular role in order to fulfill esoteric goals. So like, just because of the nature of what is being discussed, something like Frankism cannot be anything but a local phenomenon, really. Insofar as it has already sort of fulfilled its mission, so to speak, within the broader Jewish historical milieu. It's not really the idea that there are Frankists walking around, engaging in blood rituals. I mean, there are people engaging in blood rituals, but they don't identify necessarily explicitly with that history, to the exclusion of other Jewish concepts. It's not exclusive in this way. It's not like a Christian denomination, right? And I think that's maybe part of the source of the error, is we're like projecting this sort of like Christian denominational concept onto what Judaism is, when the history and structure and authority within Judaism is much more diffuse. It's much more liquid, and openly engaged in negation of itself. But yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's great stuff. And it's important to, I don't think Jeffrey Epstein had a picture of Eva Frank in his office.
Yeah, right.
I think by that point, these practices become so diffused and enculturated, and they just are absorbed into the tradition. And some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. And it just becomes a kind of Torah of absolute, a Torah of permissiveness, a Torah of antinomianism, a Torah which what is forbidden by the law is, by its paradoxical nature, permitted by the law. And that's already encoded in the Talmud, with the writings of Reish Lakish that we talked about last time. And it speaks to this paradoxical nature of sovereignty, that Karl Schmitt spoke of so well, and many of the other Weimar theologians, many of which are Jewish and Kabbalists, that which establishes the law have to be free from the law, has to be able to transcend and supersede the law. So God, that doesn't necessarily mean that God is evil, but God is not limited by the boundaries of natural law. God's not limited by, he can perform miracles. He can create exceptions basically. And so by self-deification through apotheosis of the nation of Israel, which is what this Messianic project is really about, the Jews have to be able to sort of establish the law and supersede at the same time. And I think that's kind of the mystery of the Noahide laws, that it's really about a kind of extranational, international, pseudo spiritual legal authority that's ultimately run by the rabbis and is totally privy to rabbinic interpretations. So when you see, speaking again to like what you're saying here, this self-negating open polemic against itself that Frankism seems to be a part of, where Jacob Frank is telling the Pope and the cardinals to burn the Talmud in the street. And I think there's a story about how he goes into a synagogue and sits his bare bottom on a Torah scroll as one of the strange acts of the Messiah. And then, openly talks about the blood libel. She's talking about like the blood libel. She's at one point in this video that I cut out. She's like, no, I'm not talking about the blood libel here, but the satanic cult is involved in blood rituals and ritual murder, etc. But, we do have this troublesome tradition within the Roman Catholic Church that these rituals have existed since before the writing of the Zohar, across, millennia, basically, centuries that these practices did happen. Now, whether or not we're going to choose to believe those or not is sort of up for debate. But a lot of the Frankist tradition is some hearsay according to the same standards as well. So I think we have to understand this. That's what I was trying to say about these categories of interpretation that we are accustomed to through the Western Christian tradition do not apply here. This is a dialectical system in which the open polemic against Sabbateanism doesn't necessarily make one an anti-Sabbatean. It's an internal process of critique, an internal dialogue that's meant to process reality to a point in which it's totally subject to the authority of man and a particular class of illuminist elites.
As I pointed out in the members only segment before, even Mickiewicz observes, and even other scholars on Sabbateanism and Frankism observe, like Michelson, there isn't really this firm distinction between, Talmudic, legalistic kind of Judaism and then Sabbateanism. Like there were Sabbatean Talmud scholars, and there were opponents to Sabbateanism that were deep into Kabbalistic exegesis. So these dichotomies that are being propped up just don't apply. They don't correspond to reality.
Exactly, and I've queued up this chart here. It might be a little difficult to read. Let me see if I can zoom in, maybe. It's not letting me. But it's basically outlining kind of the various streams of Jewish tradition. You've got up here the ancient Israelites, and then below them we have the Samaritans, Essenes, Pharisees, Sadducees, and then flowing from the Pharisees we have Mishnaic Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism, and then over here from the Sadducees, the Karaites. The Karaites are the only sect, to my knowledge, of modern Jews who reject any of the rabbinic writings of the Talmud or the Kabbalah. But the Karaites are viciously persecuted by other Jewish sects and not even considered Jewish. The history of, if you want to believe in the sort of the black legends of, the Inquisition and the persecutions of the Catholic Church against the Jews, just look at how much the Jews have persecuted the Karaites. Pales in comparison. So then from Mishnaic tradition, we have the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, and then these subsets of that. And then we just kind of skip forward to the Enlightenment era, the Jewish Haskalah, in which Judaism experiences this enlightenment. At the same time, it experiences this sort of modern Orthodox movement of the Hasidim, of the Haredi movement, etc. Jacob Frank's kind of emerging out around the same time, and so we have all this kind of clouded mess here at the bottom of Reform Judaism, conservative Judaism, Reconstructionist Judaism, and then the Orthodox movement, Hasidic movement, and some of the writers that will, and thinkers, Jewish scholars that will read, like for instance, this Shaul Magid, who's pretty good. I think we referenced last time. He's an Orthodox rabbi, but the majority of his research and his thought is concerned with, Hasidic Jews, Frankists, with the Baal Shem Tov, with the Haredi Satmar rabbi, Tannenbaum, I think is his name, and then on into the Chabad Lubavitch with ending with Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. So most modern day Jews revere Schneerson and revere Schneerson's thought, which is an accumulation of not just, Zohar, even the Frankist literature. They openly reference from the Frankist literature and pull ideas out of it and appropriate them. Now, you're not going to find them openly speaking about, like sex orgies and human sacrifice, which you're not going to find really Jacob Frank openly speaking about human sacrifice either. But they do use this idea of antinomianism as the stepping stone toward a messianic age openly. And that's not so sensational. It's not as sort of spectacular as we're led to believe. It's easy to say like, most modern Jews are pro-abortion, therefore they are. This is a part of this tradition of, the aforementioned, which I should probably not go too deeply into here on the YouTube channel. But there is, there's a question mark there. Is this a part of that tradition, or is this something else entirely? But then the antinomianism has more to do with like kind of this dialectical process of how do we represent reality? How do we make truth claims? How do we, like just this very chart creates the illusion that, okay, there's these different distinct categories, but all these things converge together and overlap. It would be much better as like a kind of Venn diagram than as these sort of separate compartments. But what do you think, Connor?
Yeah. And really just getting back to the question of what a Jew is. To my knowledge, like Karaites don't really, I don't know if they would describe themselves as Jew, insofar as they would describe themselves as that or identify in that way. It's due to historical linkage to the land of Judea, right? But this sort of broader identification with everything that you see on this map here is not present. It's really just a separate and entirely the same thing with the Samaritans. There are still some descendants of Samaritans that exist today, and it's not even remotely the same thing. There is this trunk, I guess you could say. There is this genetic trunk, but fundamentally, like, there is no identification with virtually everything else that's on this graph. And it gets to the point of like what is the Jew? What is what's and it's fundamentally a pejorative term, right? Or at least that's how it's kind of been transmitted in history. And the Jew is a Christ denier. That's essentially what a Jew is. A Jew is defined negatively. And so if you are defined negatively, there are all sorts of different contradictions that you can sow into your identity, because there is no positive content. There is no fiat, right? Judaism is not really a faith. not properly understood. It's not an affirmation of anything. Well, its affirmations follow from its denial. That would probably be a better way to say it. Its affirmations follow from the denial of logos, and everything.
Or they're solipsistic. Its affirmations are only about itself, about its own national,
correct. Yes.
Collective identity.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Is like it's not affirming anything transcendental, really. It's affirming things locally, contingently, based on circumstance, based on what is susceptible to rear gain, in the immediate. And that's what unifies it. That is its essence, really. Its essence is this sort of primordial negative, and everything that follows that is affirmation based on becoming, based on these local and contingent factors.
And it has this insurmountable problem of awaiting a Messiah who's never come, from their perspective, because the rejection of the true Messiah, it leaves them in this perpetual state of limbo, in which all they have is this sort of free-floating tradition, this narcissism, a kind of spiritual narcissism, which is constantly gazing upon itself and filtering through and reappropriating its own sort of innovations and exegesis until it ends up in the kind of absurdity that we see with Jacob Frank's thought. And the only affirmative that can have is its own power, its own dominion over other nations. And so it becomes a will to power religion that uses negativity as its kind of ultimate, as its Excalibur, as its ultimate weapon. And we can see this in an argument, like thinking about the Diamond Casman debate about sedevacantism. Inherently, sedevacantists are going to have this. Sorry to our sedevacantist listeners out there. I'm not trying to paint too much of a full picture here, other than to say, taking the negative stance always puts one at a certain advantage in a debate. Which being the devil's advocate always gives one a certain sort of advantage. So anyway, I think and also when one doesn't have their own sort of values beyond the will of power, it allows for a certain type of innovation, deception, infiltration. As we said from the get-go here, it's not that we have crypto Muslims who are infiltrating the Catholic Church as much as the neocons would want us to believe. They're the source of our ills. It's one religion that invades the others, and we can't lose sight of that. At the same time, we can't lose sight of our mission to be charitable and to speak truth, and to allow the truth to set us free, and to love our enemies, and to expect that there will be justice. Not necessarily in this life, although we're called to seek it, but it's something that we should expect in the true heavenly Jerusalem. So anyway, Connor, I know there's just to be transparent here with our audience. This went a lot longer than we expected it to. It's a good thing. But Connor works the night shifts, and it's hard for us to schedule times in which we're both refreshed enough to have these in-depth conversations. So I think from here, we're going to do our own individual segments on this issue of Adam Mickiewicz and Polish Messianism, and edit them together as a kind of presentation. And I'll post part of it on YouTube and then some on my Substack stream. I think I'm going to make all of these free content, not put any of it behind the paywall for our viewers. And I look forward to hearing your contributions, Connor, unless there's anything else you want to say at this point.
No, I'll leave it at that for now, and we'll get right into it.
All right. God bless you, my friend. So to continue now, I want to briefly backtrack and discuss some of the subjects and background on the thought of Jacob Frank and how it emerges out of the Lurianic Kabbalah and the tradition of Lurianic thought, particularly this concept of the two Torahs, the Torah of Absolute and the Torah of Beriah. Absolute and Beriah are two of the four worlds that are described in the Sefer Yetzirah and in the Zohar, the Kabbalistic texts from the Middle Ages. So the highest world of the four worlds is is Absolute. Absolute is the supernal realm in which all oppositions are united. So good and evil, sacred, profane, north and south, on and on and on. All oppositions are united into the primordial oneness of Ein Sof, the limitless God of Kabbalah, which is best thought of as being infinite nothingness. That makes if one can even think of such a thing. So the way the legend goes within the student of Isaac Luria, Nathan of Gaza, who is the prophet, the rabbinic thinker who sort of bolsters Sabbatai Zevi's messianic campaign. There's the Torah of the tree of life and the Torah of the knowledge of good and evil, two trees that are mentioned in the Garden of Eden. So, as Orthodox tradition states, Adam and Eve enjoyed eating from the tree of life so long as they didn't eat of the Torah of knowledge of good and evil. So when they did so, when they transgressed the law of God, they came to know the difference between good and evil, and therefore they are cast out of the paradise. So the path back toward paradise, in a sense, is not knowing the difference between good and evil. You see how sort of diabolically deceptive this can be. So that means through dialectical processing, converging good and evil so that the ontological distinction is no longer valid. So we could say that just as a thought problem, if one accepts the claim that everything is constituted by its opposition, and then we have this kind of mystical balance between the two, called the coincidence of opposites, the coincidentia oppositorum. So good needs evil in order for evil to be good. So in that sense, from the perspective of the supernal wisdom of the Torah of Absolute, they are the same. And they must be made to act as the same within the present reality in order to initiate the world to come, the Olam Hababa. It's also called the Messianic Age, or the Millennium, as it translates into Christian thought. So in this sense, there is no opposition between Judaism and Christianity. Instead, Christianity is merely a garment, a husk, a shell that conceals the inner spark of the Jewish mystical religion. Even Rabbinic Judaism itself is thought to be merely an outer garment of the inner universal religion, which the Messianic figure comes to initiate into the world. So, in that sense, internal conflict charges the dialectical battery. So, by creating conflict within the rabbinic kahal, as Jacob Frank did, or escalating controversy and tensions between the Catholic Church and the Jewish community, as Frank did, are ways of sort of aggravating the sparks, a way of sort of raising them up so that the distinctions between the two polarities can enter into a kind of communion through conflict, if that makes sense. So the dialectical battery is charged through this kind of inertia, through the kind of polar opposition that begins to sort of gravitate around itself as it would in like a cell or a battery, as like neutrons with rotating around a nucleus. So the idea here, and as we'll see, this theme of the sparks becomes very important for the thought of Polish Messianism and the role of Poland as the shell of Edom that must be raised up in order to give birth to the spark of Israel, which is the sort of messianic, Christ-like figure that is sort of post-Christian. It's a post-Christian world religion, the religion of Dot, as D-A''AT, as Connor mentioned last time. So what is initiated by this process of raising the sparks is what Jacob Frank calls new life or true life, alien life or eternal life. And this is an appropriation and a parody of the new life we receive as Christians in Christ through baptism, the sacraments, and the Eucharist. The new life in the Frankist sense refers to that found in the Torah of Absolute, the primordial and eternal life that is utterly alien and outside of the present reality. So it's a kind of Gnostic system in which the present world is seen as a chaos and a botched job that must be overcome and subjugated to this primordial oneness. And so this eternal life corresponds to a cosmic shift and overturning of the law, buttressed by the notion of a sovereign God, replaced with a God of mercy. So within Frankist thought, there's this opposition between the sovereign God Adonai, is one of the names of God that's used in the Old Testament, versus the Tetragrammaton, the Jehovah, who is the deliverer God. And the four letters of the Tetragrammaton are seen as a kind of code, kind of primordial language by which God brought creation into being. So language creates reality, and language in the particular sense of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the four letters of the Tetragrammaton, and their alphanumerical correspondence, because within Hebrew, like in Roman numerals and Latin, letters correspond to numbers. So this is where we get gematria, and one of the techniques that Kabbalists use for exegeting, these novel meanings from the Old Testament. And then also the 10 Sephiroth of the Tree of Life. So that's sort of the origin, this Torah of Absolute, the Torah of the Tree of Life. It's kind of the creation myth of the Sephiroth. It's this kind of allegory for the structure by which creation was brought into being through this emanation of the Ein Sof after this divine retraction at the beginning of time known as Zimzum, which God sort of cancels himself, negates himself in order to clear a space for this light to fill. And as it comes into the void, it fills these 10 vessels known as the Sephiroth that are unprepared to contain the pressure and the magnitude of this infinite light, so they shatter. And the resulting chaos of the shattering of the sparks and the shards of the Sephiroth is the mixed reality that we inhabit. So the Tree of Life is also an allegory for sort of the original Adam Kadmon, the man that is the sort of primordial being by which all creation issues out of. So, you can already see this play between, the cross of Calvary and Adam Kadmon, Christ as the new Adam, and the original Adam and the original Word that was with God and was God, hovering over the waters, etc. So it's a way of sort of, creating this syncretic universal religion through Hebrew mysticism. So anyway, back to this concept of true life. Frank believed that the road to Esau should lead to true life. Esau, in a sense, meaning Poland, the Christian world, and the Gentiles. A central idea of Frank's teaching, which he connected with personal freedom and liberation from all earthly rules. According to Gershom Scholem, this was the road leading also to utmost religious anarchy. Esau and Edom meant connecting with an unrelenting stream of life, a liberation from all laws, including God's law. So a contemporary thinker that I've referenced before, Agata Balik-Robson, who's Polish and very steeped in this tradition of Frankism and the Kabbalah and its implications within contemporary politics and the thought of the 20th century. She has worked extensively with a mid-20th century Jewish thinker named Jacob Taubes, who is actually quite influential for thinkers like Carl Schmitt, Eric Vogelin, Giorgio Agamben. It's actually Giorgio Agamben's teacher. And I hope to, in the future, do a series on Giorgio Agamben's thought about the resignation Benedict XVI, and that's kind of been a Benedictist position. But I digress here. So the God of Bleak Robeson says, the Tetragrammaton, the hidden God behind the revealed Adonai, is not the God of mastery and judgment, but the God of eternal life and mercy. And this is via Jakob Talbus, who is speaking of the Frankist tradition. So we see here this sort of, God is a God of mercy, God is a God of judgment. This language of the Old Testament, where the right hand of God is the hand of judgment, the left hand of God is vice versa. The left hand of God is God of judgment, is the hand of judgment. Right hand is the hand of mercy. And so that's another sort of idea that's contained within the tree of life concept. That there's, if you look at the Sephiroth, the right hand side is reserved for mercy. The left hand side is reserved for judgment. It is therefore not the God the sovereign who likes to hide his somber face, but a God of life, the merciful Lord of the world to come, which will know only the concrete science of names and letters, doing away with the abstractions of the law. So the abstraction of the law here is the idea of the primordial forms, the natural law, the idea that creation itself is a reflection of God's, in some sense, of God's being. Instead, the true God is the God who's outside of being, who's alien to this world in the Lurianic sense, who has retracted himself and made himself entirely other. So the Messianic project is about making the present reality reflect that absolute otherness, that absolute alien life that is nothing like the present reality. And overcoming sovereignty is a way of accomplishing that. It is not the terrifying master of creation which constitutes the dark abyss of nothingness behind the revelation of Christ the Redeemer, but a God of Sabbath. Sabbath here meaning the millennium, the world to come. A still hidden and unrealized possibility of the divine itself, the not yet. Here she's referencing the early 20th century Weimar Jewish philosopher Ernst Bloch and his notion of not yet being as the meontological state of redemption. So becoming, not yet being. The true God is the God who is in process, who is coming to know himself through this negation of the current reality. So the not yet of God, his own pregnant nothingness shining through his so far manifest revelation. Not the deactivated God of the Old Testament, but a not yet activated God of Olam Haba, that is the world to come. The early Hebrew emphasis on the notion of new life is characteristic of the whole genre of proto-Gnostic beliefs, which, according to Talbus, come to the fore particularly strongly in the thought of the Mandeans, an early Gnostic Jewish sect. The general introduction to almost all Mandean writings begins in the name of that great first alien life from the exalted worlds of light that stands above all works, life which appears in its pristine state as the great first life in the worlds of light, is thrown into exile in the world, where it is estranged from itself. The dramatic homecoming that follows, as ordained by the motif of salvation, is the metaphysical history of the light deprived of life in the world deprived of life, of the estranged life in the estrangement of here and now. So you can see how this is interesting and captivating for Jewish thought that sees the present reality in the sort of limbo period in the absence of a Messiah as being a continuation of the exile, as they see Christianity, particularly in the Middle Ages, Christendom, as Egypt, as they live in a kind of exile and a kind of slavery to the sacred imperium of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, which exercises both sacral and political authority. So already there's this kind of acknowledgement that there's a fulfillment of Christ's messianic mission within the idea of Christendom and medieval Europe, but they've rendered it into a kind of a ball of this world, B-A-L, a false sovereign, like a pharaoh, a pharaonic power that must be overcome in order to initiate this new reality. And they see also, there's also a kind of tacit acknowledgement that Christ is the fulfillment of Hellenic thought and of Greek philosophy, the idea of natural law, and that creation is the present reality as being a kind of reflection of God's goodness and justice, and Christ comes to redeem the world from the plague of original sin. So anyway, this concept that Frank uses of new life is like I said, a bastardization, which poses as this new life in Christ, this fulfillment of all things, but one that's expecting this new age, this apophatic negation of the existent reality in order to come to something that's purely alien. The new life is strictly opposed to the fallen life spent within the bondage of natural cycles. All Jewish messianic movements, which initiate Jewish modernity, rely on this opposition as its guiding principle. So here she's saying, calling Jewish modernity. She makes the claim that all modern movements are, in fact, Jewish at their core. And so modernity is a rebellion against the Christian Catholic worldview and cosmology. So Jewish modernity and revolution is the path out of this bondage. The source of which is obviously the line from Deuteronomy 30:19, I have set before you life and death, choose life. It is understood within this Jewish messianic tradition that the life we must choose is not the life that is bound with death, but the life that transcends the alternation of life and death. See transhumanism. So what she's describing here is we have to create a kind of life that's freed from natural cycles and contingency with the natural world, and only thus becomes free from the deathly thrall. Thus, while nature is governed by the succession of life and death, the natural life can never separate itself from its end. The messianic ideal of new life breaks the seemingly necessary connection and aims at the absolute denaturalization of life. If history, therefore, indicates a passage from the natural cage of necessity into the new kingdom of freedom, it is only possible due to the essential transformation of the singular life, moving away from the natural dominion of death. God, as the counter principle of the natural world, is the revolutionary fire itself that cannot be grasped in our worldly terms. Antinomian Gnostic metaphysics is thus also necessarily tinged with negative theology, with this difference, however, that this version of apophasis is not contemplative but active. God, as the alien counter-principle to our natural way of life, constitutes a traumatizing power. So here's the Gershom Sholom's idea of the negative messianism, of anarchic, catastrophic messianism that comes to disrupt the self-replicating processes of the natural world. Yet this trauma is necessary in a positive condition of mankind's Yitzet Mitzrayim. That means exodus from Israel. The exodus from the natural house of bondage, which paves the way to the idea of new life. The new life in the Frankist sense, and we shall see in the mind of Adam Mickiewicz, is denoted as the annihilation of natural law, natural cycle, sovereignty, metaphysical realism, and hierarchy. So this dialectical paradox of sovereignty that I alluded to earlier, that which exceeds the law established as the law, is sort of part and parcel of this concept of new life, of God that's so totally outside of creation and totally alien to creation, must be reconstituted into the world through the negation of everything that exists.
All right, so now having examined some of the connections between Frankism in its original and immediate historical context and secret societies and revolution in Europe, prior to any discussion of direct or indirect influence of Frankism, Messianism, Lurianic Kabbalistic concepts on the person of Adam Mickiewicz, I think it would behoove us to kind of back up and get sort of a bird's eye view of what's going on in Europe at this time in these, we could maybe call them these winter days of Christendom. And if we do that, I think that we will begin to get a picture of, what many of these revolutions are, what sort of ultimate ends that they serve, what they are proxies of, which we would suggest that there's essentially proxies of Jewish interests. They're using Jewish categories, they're thinking in Jewish ways, and so on. It's not really, I wouldn't say that it's an historical accident that the era of expulsions coincides with this era of romantic nationalism and revolution and socialism and so on. In the case of some people, maybe this liberty is extended to Jews for very basic humanitarian, naive sort of humanitarian reasons. But I think that there are more occult origins of this sort of historical activity. This seems also to be, in one way, the view of Karl Marx, who we would kind of, pit in with this broader sort of revolutionary wave of activity and thought in Europe. Marx, in his essay on the Jewish question, which was a response to Bruno Bauer's writing on the same topic, says something very interesting. He's writing this in 1843. This is around the time that his sort of mature philosophical thought is coming into fruition, but it's not yet really written down yet. The seeds of it, the inklings of it, we begin to see in the theses on Feuerbach, I believe. Or at least that's sort of the consensus of many scholars. This is sort of when we begin to see the mature thought of Marx. But he says here, the Jew has emancipated himself in a Jewish manner, not only because he has acquired financial power, but also because through him, and also apart from him, money has become a world power, and the practical Jewish spirit has become the practical spirit of the Christian nations. The Jews have emancipated themselves insofar as the Christians have become Jews. And that idea of the Jewish spirit, that's something that you find in Werner Sombart and his writings on Jews and on the development of capitalism. That's something in recent time we've seen in the writing of E. Michael Jones. And that I really want to highlight that last sentence, that the Jews have emancipated themselves insofar as the Christians have become Jews. And what a Christian is in this context is maybe not someone who is very, very grounded in the faith, but someone who is baptized and maybe falls away from it, someone who is nominally Christian, someone who is Christian by matter of their birthright and their nationality, but not necessarily in the matter of orthopraxy. And so we see kind of there, Marx is hinting at the idea of transition, right? Of the liberation taking place due to this sort of coincidence of opposites, right? And what's sort of going on in the sort of Gentile mindset, we might say, in the sort of Gentile or philosophical mindset, could perhaps be studied under the label of Prometheanism or Occidental eschatology, and that is the title of this book by Jakob Taubes, who was a colleague of Gershom Scholem. And I'd like to share a passage from a chapter entitled The Law of the Modern Age. This is from Book 3, entitled The Theological Eschatology of Europe. So this is the first chapter entitled The Law of the Modern Age. And he's talking about essentially the eclipse of Christianity with Prometheanism. And I'll just share a few paragraphs here. In the Copernican view of the world, there is an earth but no heaven. The earth mirrors no heaven, and the reality of the world is gained by Copernican man, not by having the world emulate a superior archetype, but by revolutionizing the world in terms of an ideal that lies in the future. The Ptolemaic world is ruled by the Platonic concept of eros, which attracts the lower sphere to the upper sphere. The Copernican world is ruled by the spirit, which invariably presses ahead. The ethics of Copernican man is an ethics of the future. As above has lost its moral significance, the moral will is focused on the future. Because the Copernican realm has been emptied of its meaning, fulfillment for Copernican man lies in time and hence in history.
lies in time and hence in history. So there is this sort of new idea, which we can see, for instance, in things like progressive revelation. Even Islam has a concept that is similar to that, but the Islamic heresy known as Baha'i, there's a concept of progressive revelation. In Hegelianism, there's a concept of progressive revelation. Christianity is not a once and for all; it's a sort of part of an unveiling of the absolute to itself in history. The transition from the Ptolemaic to the Copernican conception of the world does not happen all at once and does not really begin with Copernicus. This is important here. Its beginnings stretch back to Joachim of Fiore, who tears down the partitions separating heaven and earth by stipulating a specific date in the near future on which man will realize his ultimate goal. The Platonic relationship of image and archetype, which Origen and Augustine set up between earthly history and heavenly guidance, is transformed for Joachim into a powerful chain of events within history. The kingdom of heaven becomes the final realm of the spirit. In Joachim's theology of history, Christ, having acted as a stabilizing force in Christianity, is drawn into a Trinitarian historical process. While Christ is the absolute center for the medieval Catholic Church, dividing time into before Christ and after Christ, he becomes a powerful agency, or in the original German he says potens, a powerful agency in the historical process, first in Joachim's theology and then in the modern theology of history. With the rejection of the papacy and the charismatic church by Hussites and reformers, the unity of Christendom, the bulwark and last valuable possession of the Catholic Church, collapses. Yet, Lutheran Christianity is closely linked to Catholicism because Paul is the foundation of both. That is why there can still be a Reformed Church, because the Pauline heritage of the Reformation equates the Church with Christ. And this is basically a tension that characterizes so much of Protestantism, where you have to say, well, Christ cannot be represented through an office, through an institution, through a visible institution, but then you have this issue of the church is the body of Christ, so it is the mystical body of Christ that is in Paul. And so you get this sort of tension where it's like, well, then how do we conceive of the church as the body of Christ? And you have these ideas, for instance, like Karl Barth. I believe it's Karl Barth that has this image of the church as a kind of crater, as the sort of the impact that is left by the trauma of the incarnation. And therefore, like, the church has to be spoken of in negative terms, and therefore Christ needs to be related to in negative terms, which is really totally contrary to the idea of incarnation. So it's this very strange bind that I think Protestantism is still characterized by to this day. But continuing, while Luther rediscovers in the Word of God the new center around which the Reformed community can gather, this Word of God, holy and charismatic to Luther, is a mere shred of paper to Munzer, a successor to Joachim. Munzer, referring to Thomas Munzer, the reformer and critic of Luther, contemporary critic of Luther. With that, the last ties of Christian unity are severed, and the way is open for the spiritual religion of Sebastian Frank and Jakob Böhme. Prometheus arises in Christ's shadow. I'll repeat that. Prometheus arises in Christ's shadow. The mythological point at which Prometheus appears is always in the present time for German idealism and becomes a frequent fixed idea. I'll say it one more time. This is very important to note. The mythological point at which Prometheus appears is always in the present time for German idealism and has become a frequent fixed idea. So the idea remains with each generation that is sort of under this spell, the era in which the eschaton is coming, in which we're just sort of on the verge of this new world, is about to become, right, in each subsequent generation that is sort of under the spell. He quotes Schelling here. Schelling explicitly evokes Prometheus as the symbol of philosophy. Quote, "Is it not evident that the tendency to transpose the infinite into the finite and vice versa is dominant in all philosophical discussion and exploration? Such thoughts are eternal, a gift of the gods to mankind, a divine gift to man which Prometheus brought down to earth along with the purest fire of heaven." End quote. Marx celebrates Prometheus as a saint in the philosophical calendar. And I think that will be enough from Jakob Taubes. So, toying around with this historiographical concept of Prometheus rising in the shadow of Christ in the post-Copernican era, in light of information previously expressed about Joachim of Fior and Messianism in general in the previous installment, it doesn't really take much mental labor to conclude that Prometheanism is a kind of Judeo-Masonic ideological proxy. And indeed, under this aspect, Prometheus appears as a kind of Gentile origin story for fire and for civilization. It'll be important here to consider another figure for whom fire is of importance, namely Heraclitus, who identifies fire as the arche, this sort of early pre-Socratic philosophical conundrum of the arche, the origin, the elemental substrate, the underlying of things. Thales identifies it as water, notably. There are a few other sort of solutions. This is sort of a basic sort of physical problem, which is considered to be, the origins of certain philosophical considerations in Greek culture. This concept of fire being the arche and other concepts that are derived from surviving fragments of Heraclitus are interpreted by the consensus to depict Heraclitus as a kind of philosopher of becoming, as sometimes juxtaposed with Parmenides as the philosopher of being. And it's not really that simple, but that's sort of the basic historiographical consensus. Heraclitus is probably most notably a profound influence on Hegel, who remarked in his lectures on the history of philosophy that every proposition of Heraclitus that is known is adopted in Hegel's logic. Hegel's logic is, we could describe it as dialetheist, meaning that it is contradiction tolerant, and that it affirms the existence of statements that are simultaneously true and false. Hegel understands Heraclitus' identification of fire with the arche not as a sort of literal elemental substrate, as Thales understands water, but rather as a kind of allegory for a thing which is ceaselessly motive, ceaselessly in motion and change. For Hegel, for a thing to be in motion, it means that a thing is to be there and not there in simultaneity and in the same sense. And therefore, motion, in Hegel's understanding, transgresses Aristotelian notions of identity, non-contradiction, and the exclusion of the middle. So fire in Hegel's Heraclitus typifies this identification of being and non-being, and therefore the coincidence of good and evil. And the relationship of the symbolism of fire to revolution more broadly is not exactly mysterious. I'm sure most people have some anecdotal experience relating to revolutionary types, using phrases like, igniting sparks of revolution, setting things ablaze, burning it all down, that kind of thing. And just to be clear, by revolution, here we're not simply just talking about revolution in the sense of political upheaval, although that's an important historical component of revolution. What we're kind of talking about, well, let's get back to the etymology of revolution. The word in its sort of original, conventional context of cosmology and geometry, which did not exist in ancient Latin but was around in medieval Latin, refers to the return to the point of origin, right? And in using this term to describe various different political upheavals, upheaval is another interesting metaphor, but for lack of a better term, in using this term to describe certain political upheavals, that's the sort of connotation that's being played on there, right? We're returning to a point of origin. We're getting rid of the adumbrations. We're kind of casting off the encroaching tyranny and the excess debt, and separating the wheat from the chaff, and returning to a state of nature, natural law and that kind of thing. So that's sort of the more original context, and we see that even in the Glorious Revolution and in the aftermath, the writings published in the aftermath of the English Civil War by Republican leveler ideologues. Even in their context, revolution, although obviously problematic, is not so much referring to this idea of like social change. It's more so referring to a kind of return to, the sort of mythology of the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy or septarchy or whatever it is. Eliminating the monopoly that exists on power, right? And obviously in John Locke, there's a lot of problematic ideas. He has a problematic Arian Christology, but he's more so. It's difficult to see him as conversant with a sort of messianic tradition, or maybe I'm being too naive here, but Locke seems to be more so just naively engaging with empiricism and idealism, with the various different philosophers of his day, Descartes, Berkeley, Hobbes and Filmer, and so on. He's concerned with questions of mind, questions of semiotics, questions of international diplomacy between different Christian nation states, and he's very much still working with this kind of residual scholastic Aristotelian lexicon, even though he's part of this broader movement that's about casting these Aristotelian categories away. He's still very much conversant with that literature, and that seems to be sort of the origin of a lot of his ideas. And so, the big thing about Locke, he's not really interested in history. Obviously, he's an empiricist. So we don't really see much interest in history. He's not an eschatologist. And I think that's what we're driving at. Revolutionary sort of eschatology. Revolution proper, or at least in our sense, I think does not really come onto the scene in a powerful way until the 18th and 19th centuries, in this era where of what James Billington, the former Librarian of Congress, what he describes as the revolutionary fiat or revolutionary faith in his book Fire in the Minds of Men, which is concerned with, at least part of it is concerned with giving attention to this very overlooked role of occult ideas, alchemical ideas, quasi-Kabbalistic ideas in the ideologies that gain sort of dominance among the European intelligentsia at this time. And Billington's text is highly recommended. It's a monumental work. The idea of revolutionary fiat, I think, is very apt. He points to, the Promethean. He points to the occult origins of certain, speculations among ideologues, especially about like the particular meanings of fraternity and equality. He points to the eschatological element, to the historical element. He points to this revolutionary grammar that is provided by, in some, there's inklings of it in Saint-Simon, and then, it's perfected in Hegel and Marx. And all that's well and good, although, by way of critique, Billington is a liberal. He doesn't really have commitments to preserving the historical integrity of Christendom, and in a way he finds a lot of this stuff pretty awesome. He sees something humanitarian in all of it. So he's biased, and we have to take that into account in reading this historical narrative that he presents, which there is a lot of truth in it. But that said, conspicuously absent from this book is any mention of Kabbalah. There's not. I couldn't find a single mention of the word Kabbalah. There's constant employment of this category error of Judeo-Christian, right? There's only a single mention of Jakob Böhme. Interestingly enough, in a section where he's talking about speculation about the origins of antipathy in gender relations, he's making reference to Jakob Böhme's Kabbalistic speculations, although he doesn't really use that terminology of Kabbalistic. But there's not really too much talk about the influence of Böhme on the logic of Hegel, and I think the logic is probably the most important aspect of this grammar that this revolutionary grammar that he's providing, wherein keeping with this contemplation of the symbol of fire as the motive substrate, and in his understanding of motion as both being and non-being. This logic identifies being and non-being. It identifies the presence of good and its absence or evil. He sees evil as within good, or maybe vice versa. In the words of Moses Cordovero, the shell, evil, precedes the fruit, which is good. And there are different manners in which that could be interpreted, as ontological or methodological. But the idea is that evil in some way precedes or is conjoined to good. And that's very explicit in Hegel, and Hegel explicitly gets that from Jakob Böhme. He talks about it in his lectures on the history of philosophy. So I think the hermeneutic that we're trying to promote here is more in line of what Taubes is offering in terms of the Kabbalistic and the Messianic, and how that figures into revolution and into Prometheus. And Prometheus is really just a sort of, who is Prometheus, right? Prometheus is disinterested, right? In most accounts of the story, in the sort of original account of the story, he's not necessarily interested in humanity. He's not giving fire to humanity, for the sake of humanity. He's giving it to humanity in order to ape the gods. And in, the sort of humanitarian eisegesis of that you find in a lot of Marxists and a lot of like humanistic Marxists, he's a vanguard leader. He is he's Vladimir Lenin, right? He's leading us, toward this eschaton by accelerating contradictions, right? And giving us the tools, more importantly, giving us the tools to accelerate contradictions, giving us the tools to ignite sparks. And this idea of spark as well is very important in Kabbalistic exegesis. Now, sparks have two very notable connotations within the Kabbalistic tradition. One is this obvious connotation of from the parable of the blacksmith and banging against the shell to emit divine sparks radiantly. The other is the identification of spark with a seed in the sort of reproductive sense, and in the context of the Kabbalistic exegesis of primordial man. Primordial man is an androgynous, two-faced being with what would otherwise be morphologically separate beings conjoined into one, and facing in opposite directions, much in the way of the similarly to the Roman god Janus. And of course, because they're facing in opposite directions, the seed is emitted radiantly and is not able to culminate or develop, I should say, in a proper vessel, right, by way of design. So, and you have to keep in mind, we're a lot of this is being spoken of in with preformationist embryological notions. So these are homunculi that are being spilt and then developing in the air. This is considered to be a sort of origin of the demonic. It's homunculi that were spilt and then developed in the elemental air. And so you'll see that man is designed such that evil is the inevitable consequence of his activity, and this evil is also, at the same time, the spread of the divine sparks. And I think that this lexicon is important to draw on when we're trying to understand the Kabbalistic within the metapolitical, and the bringing about calamity, the bringing about crisis. I think that this is the proper hermeneutic for not only our own time, but also this revolutionary era. What Jakob Taubes calls the modern age in his chapter, "The Law of the Modern Age." So to conclude this segment, I'd like to return to those words of Karl Marx in his essay on the Jewish question. He says, "The Jew has emancipated himself in a Jewish manner, not only because he has acquired financial power, but also because through him and also apart from him, money has become a world power, and the practical Jewish spirit has become the practical spirit of the Christian nations. The Jews have emancipated themselves insofar as the Christians have become Jews." And Marx is kind of fixated on this, this moral aspect of usury and banking and so on. But I think, the profound component of his observation there is that last sentence: the Jews have emancipated themselves insofar as the Christians have become Jews. The people who are Christians by birthright have been initiated into these Kabbalistic categories and ways of relating to the world, knowingly or not. We might recall from the last installment this idea of the rooster prince, right? That is found in both Rabbi Nachman of Breslov and Jacob Frank in the Words of the Lord. The idea is to present yourself as wise among the Gentile, wise among the lower species, as a higher member of the lower species, in the manner of a Prometheus almost, and present yourself as particularly erudite and possessing a way for a method of improvement, the tools of improvement, the tools of replacing the current totality with another, a way of speciating from your present circumstance, and in this manner influence the behavior of the Gentile and change their beliefs and change their life. That is kind of a microcosm of what is going on here in this revolutionary era, with this introduction of these secular concepts, secular Kabbalistic concepts, the messianic and the idea of sparks as pertains to the question of good and evil, sort of rendered in philosophical lexicography. That's what we see in this era, and I think that is the proper way to conceive of what is going on here.